I'm Helen Chersky and welcome to the Fully Charged Show podcast. Our civilization needs energy to function, and the wonderful variety of Earth gives us a wide range of potential energy sources to tap into. That's awesome and important because it means there's lots of flexibility. Theoretically, you can get energy from the best place for your specific situation. And wind and solar are fantastic, but they're not going to be suitable for everything. So here at Fully Charged, we're also keeping an eye on the other renewable energy options. We've got a show coming out in the next couple of weeks about a company who are making really rapid progress with a new method for fusion energy. So we thought it was the perfect time to put out the podcast of this Fully Charged Live 2019 talk. The talk title was The Next Wave, Fusion, Hydrogen, Tidal and Wave. I spoke to Chantal Nobs from the Culham Centre for Fusion Energy, Neil Kermode from the European Marine Energy Centre, and Kerry-Ann Adamson from Advisian. They were full of fascinating insights into the next wave of technologies for harvesting energy. So here's the talk.
Here to talk about the next wave, fusion, hydrogen, tidal and wave, all those forms of energy that we hear about. They're not the obvious things like wind turbines and solar panels, but they're there. They could be very important for our future, but they're sort of ticking away behind the scenes. So, to learn a little bit about where they've got to and where they're going, please join me in welcoming our panel, Chantal Nobs, Neil Kermode and Kerry-Ann Adamson. So this is one of those, what I want to try and do here is to kind of get underneath these big topics a bit, because we hear the words, we hear kind of headline level bits of information about them, and it can be quite hard to get at what's actually going on and what it means, and how these different technologies could all happen at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. So to get started, I'm going to ask everyone to say a little bit about their particular expertise in this area. Neil, perhaps you'd like to start.
Yeah, I'm the managing director of an organisation called EMEC, which is the European Marine Energy Centre. We're based in Stromness in Orkney. I'm a civil engineer by training, EV driver, general energy nut. And the test centre has hosted more wave and tidal energy machines than any other site anywhere in the world. So far we've had about 30 different machines in the water testing how we can harvest energy from the waves and the tides. And I'll tell you more about that later.
And just to provide a bit of context here, Orkney has been really leading in this area, right? Is all of Orkney powered by renewable energies now? Could it be?
Well, in terms of our electricity supply, we've produced more electricity than we've needed every year since 2012. And last year was about 120% of our electricity needs. A part of that is from tide, most of it is from large wind, although we've also got a large number of people with domestic wind turbines, so about 750 of those. 1/9 of all the domestic wind turbines are in Orkney. Over 22,000 people. I've got one, and they work.
So that's useful context, because it can work. I mean, Orkney's in a very specific position, but this stuff can work. Okay, Kerry-Ann, how about you?
Good afternoon. So I'm Kerry-Ann. I work for yet another consulting firm. It's called Advisian. You'll all forget that. It's fine. And I am a subject matter expert on fuel cells and hydrogen. I'm not an engineer. I feel like it's a confession. I don't build anything. I'm the one they let out because I can talk to people. Most engineers can't. So I go...
Might be some engineers in the audience.
I know. So I go out and speak to companies right along the supply chain, including the ugly ones like refineries. Yes, they still exist. On how to decarbonise and use green hydrogen and move away from black hydrogen. So I work predominantly with green hydrogen, and this is the link to hydrogen cars, buses, ships, planes, trains, and everything else you can name in between.
Fabulous. And last but not least, Chantal.
So I'm Chantal. I'm a radiometric researcher at the Culham Centre for Fusion Energy, so CCSE. So my background is as a nuclear physicist. CCFE sits under a sort of umbrella organisation, UKAEA. So that's why I've got a UKAEA badge.
So that's Atomic Energy.
Atomic Energy Authority for the UK. So I'm at CCFE, which is based in Oxfordshire. And we do nuclear fusion research. So nuclear fusion is the process that powers our sun and has done for 4.5 billion years. And we're essentially trying to shrink the sun down into donut-shaped vessels known as tokamaks and harness the power of fusion energy. And we have been doing fusion at CCFE since the early 80s. Using a machine called JET, the Joint European Torus, and we currently hold the world record for the most power produced in fusion. And then from that, the next stage really is to, first of all, get more power out of fusion power plants than you put in, and also to work out how to extract energy from fusion devices. And this will be demonstrated in ITER, which is our next machine, currently being built in the south of France. And then the final stage is demo, which we're currently designing. It's our demonstration power plant, which will actually put power onto the national grid and hopefully launch loads of fusion power plants around the UK and the world.
So let's go back a little step for all three of you. Let's first of all start with how these technologies work a little bit and what state they're in now. That's the important bit. And do cover the green and black hydrogen thing. But perhaps we could start with Neil. So what's the principle on which these work, and do they work? How easy is it? Where's the technology at? Could this be scaled up easily?
How long have we got? Okay, so wave
2 minutes.
Okay, this is going to be quick then. Wave and tidal energy are driven by two completely different force sets. So wave energy is effectively old wind energy. It blew across the water, it caused a ripple, the ripples piled up into waves, the waves eventually turn up, generally on west-facing coasts due to the spin of the Earth. Machines are embedded generally in the top surface of the water and flex or react in some way to the waves. Tidal energy, on the other hand, is it's gravity. It's the position of the sun, the moon, and the wind. The sun, the moon, and the earth. Water is attracted, the skin of water on the earth is attracted into a bulge, and as the earth spins through this bulge, so we see the tides appear to come in and go out. So this is about water moving horizontally. Wave energy is generally about water moving vertically. That's how it works. Where are we? So wave energy is not as well advanced as tidal energy because, frankly, technically, it's a very hard thing to do. Tidal energy, we've been getting on pretty well, and last year, a company called Orbital Marine Power, based in Kirkwall in Orkney, produced a machine which generated around about 3 gigawatt hours, which represented about 7% of Orkney's electricity. So that means our islands were running roughly one day a fortnight on tidal energy. So there are a couple of machines around, but they are very early days. There are 3 in the Pentland Firth, 4 in the Pentland Firth, another one that's been on our site, some more in Shetland. So it's not a ubiquitous energy source, but it is very concentrated. Overall, the estimates are that tidal energy could do around about 15% of the UK's electricity supply by around about 2030, by 2050, but we've got to get on with it. So we've just a very low base, what we have to build on, that's going to get us to that point. Size of the market, around about 100 billion gross value added by 2050, or put it another way, twice the value of the automotive industry in the UK at the moment. That's where we're going, but we have initial machines only at the moment.
And just something I think that's quite interesting about tides, this is me with my oceanographer hat on, that tides are not the same. The UK is actually very lucky when it comes to our tidal range. So, I live in London, the tidal range in the Thames estuary is 5 metres. And there's many places in the world where it basically is only less than 20 centimetres. So and that's just sort of geographical accidents. So we've more potential than most there, right?
Yeah, absolutely right. And there are a number of sites around which have got a tidal energy potential. Generally speaking, they're not in the middle. So tidal potential around here, fairly low. Around the edges of the country, very high. And particularly, it's on the north and the western edges. So that's really important in terms of the opportunity for industrialisation, the act of helping communities in these areas harvest the energy that's there in the water just off the beach and using it for creating useful employment and harvesting energy sustainably in perpetuity.
So, Kerry-Ann, you next. So, tell us a little bit about the sort of principle behind it and what is the state now? How advanced is this technology?
Okay, so I'm sure there's somebody in the audience thinks they've got the killer question about how is hydrogen produced today. So let's get this out of the way straight away. 98% of the world's hydrogen today, which is 16 billion tons for those making notes, is produced from fossil fuels. That is known as black, grey or brown hydrogen, depending on how you like your colours. Blue hydrogen is hydrogen from natural gas plus CCS. Right, that is for those who think that CCS is going to be a viable future alternative.
Don't just say what CCS is.
Carbon capture and storage, shoving the CO2 into the ground and forgetting about it. Green hydrogen is where you produce it from renewable energy. How it is produced is from a box. It doesn't matter how the box works. The box works. It produces hydrogen from electricity. There are two types of boxes. One produces very highly pure hydrogen, which you can put direct in all transport applications into space, etc., etc., etc. There is another type where, depending if you're a fan of Robert Ranking or Val McDermott, the side product is quite useful in that it can be used to decompose human bodies. It's that acidic. So it depends what you want the hydrogen for, it depends how much you want, and it depends where you want it produced. We can produce it very neatly in Orkney, it's being done now, and then it can be shipped to the point of use, or it can be produced at the point of consumption. Now that's the headline. So where is it today? Well, depending on the world where you are, you can buy a fuel cell car if you live in Japan, London, California, South Korea, a couple in Germany. The car companies are releasing these slowly into the marketplace because they cannot afford for these to go badly wrong. And they tend to be manufactured in a very loving way. You know, one bit's manufactured, stroked and checked over, and then another bit. So they're not produced at volume yet. That is going to change very quickly within the next decade. They are going to be at price parity in Japan with electric vehicles by 2025. The government have said that. Japanese people do what they're told. We don't.
Right, so, and just very briefly, just connect together hydrogen and a fuel cell for me.
So the fuel cell is the equivalent of the engine in your car. A fuel cell is what drives the vehicle or what drives the stationary power plant. It consumes high-grade hydrogen. There are some types of fuel cells that don't require high-grade hydrogen, but these are really big boxes that are never going to anywhere near your car.
Okay, so last bit of context here then, Kerry-Ann. Fusion, and maybe just, sorry, not Kerry-Ann, Chantal, looking at the wrong place on my notebook. Fusion, and maybe just, because there's been this thing about fusion. People have been saying it's 40 years away, ever since 1945. And I've seen a few different fusion technologies, these massive plants out in California, people like First Light who are doing it in a room, and then there's the tokamaks in the middle. So a little bit about how it works, but also where, is it still 40 years away?
Yep. So currently, nuclear powers about 20% of our national grid, but that's nuclear fission, and what we're trying to do is nuclear fusion. So we're trying to clean up the nuclear that's currently powering our national grid. We're trying to remove the element of this radioactive waste that's produced in fission by doing fusion, and that's really hard to do. So at CCFE, we've spent the last sort of 30 odd years understanding the physics behind fusion, understanding the challenges, developing the engineering, developing the materials. We can do fusion. We do fusion regularly. We heat our materials, our fuels inside our tokamaks to 150 million degrees, 10 times hotter than the center of the sun, regularly. We do this all the time. We fuse lots of different materials. Fusion is easy, but commercializing fusion is really, really hard because although the physics behind it is understood, you've got to make sure that your materials can withstand these fusion conditions. So we've got incredibly high temperatures, and we've got incredibly intense magnetic fields controlling the plasmas inside. And to do fusion continuously, which is obviously what we want to do, we want to have continuous power onto the national grid, you have to have materials that can sustain these intense conditions. So what we're designing now, and it's currently under construction, I think there's always a live feed to its construction. It's ITER in the south of France. We hope to have ITER running by 2025, and ITER will be kind of the next step. So it won't just be doing the same fusion that we've been doing so far, but it will be looking at how we bridge that gap between fusion research and commercializing fusion energy. So it will be using things like superconducting magnets, which will be vitally important for continuous operation. So we currently use copper-based magnets. This means that we can only run our fusion power plants for a matter of seconds, whereas superconducting magnets, because they never heat up, we can run the power plant continuously. And they'll also be testing some new materials. So ITER, by 2025, will be that first step in showing us that we can build demo and have demo operating by 2050, so about 30 years away.
So it's almost 30 years, and we should say at this point, there's more than one way to skin this cat. So it used to be that the tokamaks were considered the only way to do it, and actually now there are other technologies that are being trialled. But in the system you just described, the biggest obstacle is time, I think. So just from the other two, why aren't we doing this already? What's holding this back? What are the obstacles?
It's determination and will. That's what always holds us back. We understand the laws of physics and the chemistry. We've got that. We just haven't decided we want to do it hard enough yet. So at the moment, the way that the funding is put together is very piecemeal. This is not being funded in the way that a strategic program, in my opinion, should be funded. We need to get to a point where we are, it's a concerted effort. So if I draw a parallel, and by the way, I'm a great fan of fusion, if this bet comes off, brilliant. If it doesn't, we're going to need plan B. So it's about keeping your options open. But the fusion debate, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, oh, should we be doing this? Should we put this money into this program? But you hear that debate all the time about marine renewables and renewables as a whole. And that seems very asymmetric. And I think we've got to get to a point where people think, of course we're doing that.
And just to add to that, so along with the, no technology is perfect, right? Nothing solves every problem. And so every technology has its downsides. What are the downsides of tidal? Because, we're aware that there's a lot of awareness about the ocean now, and so disturbing tides and waves, are there any downsides? What's the honest assessment of that?
We don't exactly know, but we're looking very carefully. So at the moment, what's happened, we have put wave machines out and tidal energy machines out. We have had monitoring going on. We've studied very, very, very carefully to see if there are effects. The effect we notice is actually when the vessels go out and put the machines out, it has an effect on changing wildlife behaviours a bit. As soon as the boats go, the wildlife comes back. Now, that's really useful to know, but that's only on a few machines that are out. Do we know how this is going to pan out when we have hundreds of machines or thousands of machines? And we have to make sure we're keeping a very close eye on it. So as part of what we do, we have monitoring activities that go on. We work very closely with Marine Scotland, and we seek to understand what's happening. We cannot afford to just blunder out there and give it a go and hope. So we have to be responsible. We have to earn our right to be out in the ocean doing this thing. But at the moment, we are not seeing adverse effects. Intuitively, it will have an effect because you're taking energy out of the system. So there will be an effect. We just need to understand whether that's significant or damaging or actually is benign, because we know that some of these structures will themselves probably change the way behaviours go on. We might find that fishing is actually better around these structures, just as they find fishing around the structures in the Gulf of Mexico is actually a beneficial fishery that's being created out of an oil industry. What will be our moment? I don't know yet. Come back in 20 years and I'll tell you.
I'm not sure the Gulf of Mexico is doing life in the Gulf that much good, actually. But yeah, in general, it may well be attracting more fish just next to it. Okay, so Kerry-Ann, obstacles and potential downsides. Where does all of that sit?
Okay, rant coming, be warned. We in the UK and globally are heavily balkanised into camps. EVs or hydrogen, renewables or nuclear. That is utter cobblers, and I'm being polite because there's children in the audience. Unless all the stakeholders and players get together and work together on a systems level approach, the change that we are all here for is going to go slower than it could. If we actually all get together around the same table and operate on a systems level scale, we can make change happen a lot quicker. But by having people saying, oh yeah, I don't like hydrogen, it's a fuel cell. Can't imagine who said that. Then it's stopping the transition from happening in a way that it could. What is the downsides of green hydrogen? It's expensive. We need every single gigawatt of zero carbon energy we can get our hands on. And that's going to include green hydrogen. And the more renewables we produce, the cheaper the hydrogen becomes. What about the other downsides? Is it safe? Well, yes, we've been using this as an industrial fuel for 50 years. They know how to look after the molecules. Don't use a lighter around a hydrogen refueling station or a mobile phone. You're not supposed to now. So why are you worried about doing it in the future? So we have a number of issues to work out, but the biggest one I would say is, please, can the industry get their act together and all of us get together?
Okay, so calming down from the rant. Good
Sorry.
rant, well done. So just before we go to audience questions, I did want to ask each of you, so you're working in slightly unusual jobs. You walk around, you talk to people. When you meet someone on the street or one of your, someone at a party, you say to them what you do. What's the reaction you get, and what are the things you find yourself saying in response? Chantal.
So I guess that's that typical question of it's always 30 years away. That's usually the one that comes up first. But I guess a lot of people also ask, is that a dangerous job to be in? Because usually the word nuclear sparks, it has a lot of connotations with existing nuclear power plants. And obviously what we're doing is very different. It's a much cleaner, much safer way of doing fusion. So yeah, usually a bit worried.
Neil, what reactions do you get when you tell people what you do?
Generally, surprise and amazement, followed by, oh, you don't have an Orcadian accent, do you? No, it's this Bournemouth. I'm sorry about it. I moved up there. I think the main reaction tends to be around, so why aren't we doing this already? To which the answer is, we could do, but we just are not trying hard enough. And usually people go away quite agitated and a bit angry and hopefully determined to tell our politicians that we actually need to get on with this, because this has got a massive opportunity as an industrial activity, which then gives us exports, gives us jobs, decarbonises, it's sustainable, it's in all the right places. It gets that, why aren't we doing it moment? So I would strongly urge you to do just that. Go and tell your politicians we need to get on with this.
And Kerry-Ann, what reactions do you get when you tell them what you do?
Well, I think I'm like my other two colleagues up here in that we all work in areas that everybody has an opinion on. So when you tell somebody what you do, what their reaction tends to be, well, in my opinion, and then you have to insert 3 minutes to listen to them.
Yeah, I sympathise with that. Do there is any systematic patterns in their opinions, or is it just Because I feel people generally don't, of all these things, it's hydrogen that people understand the least.
And they tend to think they understand quite a lot as well. So the two reactions I get is, but you're a woman, and I tend to get that a lot.
You'd probably noticed.
Yeah, right. It's like, doesn't stop me having a brain. And also, but it's this, it's this, it's this, it's this, and it's this. And you're like, how long have we got?
All right. Okay, so let's have some questions from the audience. So it would be great if you, short questions, not comments.
First question, Neil, could you please comment on the Tidal Lagoon project that got cancelled in Wales, and what's the reason for it? And question number 2 is...
I don't think you're allowed 2 questions.
Quick question. The need, a lot of people think that when they solve their own energy problem solved, but I'm an engineer also with a hydrogen background. Could you please sort of link up the need for nuclear, especially in heavy industry and maybe in agriculture as well, getting that bulk power available in the grid?
Okay, so cancelled tidal things in Wales.
Yeah, I don't understand why that didn't really get the green light.
Do you want to just explain what it was?
Yes, sorry. On the west coast, particularly in the Severn estuary, the estuary is resonant, so basically the tidal range is much higher there than it is in a lot of other places. And that tidal range gave the opportunity to basically capture the tides when it came in a ring structure, and then hold the water back. And when the tide went out, you've then got a body of water at a higher level than the rest of the estuary. You can then pull the plug, let the water run out, run through turbines and generate electricity. Basically a self-refilling, salty hydro scheme. That's how it works. It was decided by government that it wasn't deemed to be economic, which I think is a great shame. I think one of the arguments was that there are very few locations to do this sort of thing, which I don't think is necessarily the case, but it didn't feel as though it had the opportunity to be repeated time and time and time again, which therefore gives you the learning, which therefore allows you to drive the cost down. That was the argument. Personally, I don't buy it, but that was really the thrust. It would have generated a lot of predictable, sustainable energy in perpetuity, and it should be at very low cost by the time you discount that across the entire life of the project, which is likely to be, I don't remember, 50 or 100 years. So it's a very long-term project, and unfortunately, the way our finances are structured, we don't seem to be able to recognise the value of long-term. And I think
okay, so I'm going to move on from your second question because I want to let a few other people have a question. So,
hi. So how much would you say that the commercialization of nuclear fusion is based on new physics and the discovery of like more superconducting materials, for example?
Yeah, so superconducting materials are fundamentally important to creating fusion power plants that can run continuously. And actually, interestingly, in designing and building ITER, the amount of superconducting material that was required to build that power plant actually rejuvenated and really kicked life into the superconducting industry. And we're kind of encouraging each other. We're encouraging the design and development of superconductors whilst also using them to improve nuclear fusion. So, yeah, fundamentally important.
And it is quite interesting here that this is a material science problem. The actual physics has been dealt with, and all of this is about materials that can withstand radiation, for example, and you can deal with the super... So it's not the thing itself, it's the practicalities of making it happen.
Yeah, exactly. So in fusion, we generate huge numbers, billions and billions of very high energy neutrons every second. These are kicking atoms out of materials that we're using for construction materials and power plants, making them more brittle. So yeah, it's a material science problem into can we either get stronger materials or can we engineer these things in such a way that it's easy to replace components easily throughout the lifetime of the machine.
I'm curious how you see energy of the future. If I look into the future of fusion, it sounds like there's only fusion and that's it. Right now it's fluctuating renewable energy and we need storage, we need sector coupling, those kind of things. I'd just like to see your vision. What will be the energy system of the future?
It's like a binary choice, isn't it? Do we solve the fusion problem or don't? There's two separate paths.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a misconception. I think a lot of people think it's nuclear or it's renewables, and we do renewables until we've got nuclear, and then we'll just do nuclear. But I think forever, my opinion is that we will always need a mixture of both. We will always need nuclear to provide that sheer sort of base load power to industry, that's coming back to your point. And then we're going to need renewables for sort of domestic applications, for transport, for all these economical and technological advancements. But it's always going to be a mixture that we're going to need, I think.
Have either of you got a comment on energy mix of the future? Yeah.
Future is going to be a complicated mix of different solutions that everybody has to play a part in becoming active consumers. We need to make active choices. It is completely understandable that we're going through this transition because we're used to simple solutions. That time is gone. That time is dead.
In terms of the future energy makeup, we're doing some work in Orkney at the moment, which is supported by BEIS, the Business Enterprise and Industrial Strategy Department, which is looking to put join up a number of the energy vectors, so the transport, heat and electricity. So a project is underway at the moment called Reflex, which we're looking to try and understand how we can build flexibility into the network to deal with just the point you're making about the intermittency, or more accurately, the variability of renewables. Because we believe that the opportunities for harvesting energy locally, using it locally, retaining value locally is actually important to local communities. So we see a more dispersed model working, harvesting what we have available. If the big bet comes off and we do get fusion working, then we might all be able to go home and we'll sit around enjoying ourselves with our leisure time. At the moment, we have focused very much on making something work that is in a dispersed energy system, and that's a different configuration to that which we have today. So there's a lot of work to do.
Well, we're actually at the end of our time. That's probably a good point to finish. So there's all this stuff. It is something to pay attention to, I think, because even though it feels like these decisions are made, they're big decisions made by other people, we do all have a role to play. And like Neil said, hassling your politicians is a good way to get things done. So thank you for coming. Please join me in thanking our three fabulous panellists, Chantal, Neil and Kerry-Ann.
Thank you to our Patreon supporters. We are well aware that without your support, we wouldn't be able to do these podcasts, the Fully Charged live events, our Patreon-only events, not even the YouTube channel, and we really appreciate your support. So if you're interested in becoming a patron on Patreon, follow the links in the show notes. Oh, and check out our brand new website, fullycharged.show. If you've got a moment, do leave us a 5-star rating and review on your favourite podcast player, or even your second favourite podcast player, any of them really. It helps us get discovered by the newbies, and it gives us credibility in the world of podcasts. And so many people are now realising how important and fascinating this stuff is. There are loads of newbies, so help them find us. If you're a newbie, you're very welcome. Come back. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to our 2 YouTube channels. There's the main Fully Charged one, and also Fully Charged Regen, which has these talks in video form. So as always, if you have been, thank you for listening.